So I just got a question from Scott asking about whether he should be investing in the stock market right now or whether he should wait until there's less uncertainty in the market, given that there's an election coming up and illness going around and the markets just being the markets. And I'm going to be honest, there's never going to be a perfect time to invest in the stock market. See, the stock market is driven by news. That's one of the biggest factors that makes stock prices go up and down. And there's always going to be bad news in the stock market, whether it be something random like an illness or whether a company is missing their earnings or not performing well in the short term. And we're never going to be in a world where there's no bad news. Just as how the world works, there's always bad news going around. So there's never going to be a perfect time to enter the markets because there's never really going to be a time where there's nothing bad going on in the world. And also you have to consider that if nothing's going wrong in the world right now and all the news that's coming out is good news, then stock valuations are most likely going to be very, very rich and very high, because the markets are then going to be optimistic. So you're not even going to find a good opportunity to invest your money. And in my opinion, probably the best time and one of the most perfect times to invest in a stock is when there's short-term news that's negatively affecting the company. That's probably the best time to enter in for the long term. If there's news that's going to affect a company only in the short term and not have any long-term impacts, their stock price is going to go down in just short term. But it's a perfect opportunity to invest in that stock as long as you're confident that they're going to be okay for the long term. And it's a very quick way and a very good way to make money in the long term. And that's what a lot of successful investors did back during March. Back during March, a lot of retail stores and restaurants were shutting down. And if you bought a restaurant ETF back in March, you would be up 60% today. Think about it. If you invested in the restaurant industry, which I'm sure will be fine in the long term, you would be up 60% today because they were facing some short-term crisis. And that's why I think it's very good to invest in a stock if they're facing some short-term crisis. If you invest in a stock while their stock price is down in the short term, and as long as the company is going to be good in the long term, you're going to have a phenomenal long-term investment because you're getting a strong business for the long term at a relatively cheap price. And also, Scott was wondering about bonds and whether he should be buying bonds right now due to the uncertainty in the market. And I have to say that as long as you're owning a stock for multiple years, you should definitely be in stocks. Is that as long as you're aiming to invest for multiple years and you don't need the money in the short term, for at least for the next few years, you don't need the money that you're investing, you should definitely be in stocks, because over the long term, really, stocks are pretty much always going to outperform bonds. So every dollar that you put in a bond is $1 that you are not putting in a stock. And that $1 can seriously grow to large amounts of money over the long term. For example, having $1 today will be worth almost $2 in 7 years if you get an average return of 10%. And if you're investing in individual stocks, it's very realistic to have at least a 10% return per year. And every dollar that you put in a bond has such a large opportunity cost. Every dollar that you put in a bond is foregoing so much growth that it could potentially have in a stock. And that's why I would never recommend anyone to put any money in bonds ever, as long as they don't need the money, at least for a couple years. And if you are invested in bonds right now, I would personally go into a dividend ETF. Dividend ETFs are so much better in my opinion because you can get a much higher rate of return over the long term. And there's very little risk with these dividend ETFs because you're invested in so many different stocks. Like literally, to lose money in a dividend ETF over the long term, there would need to be some sort of global crisis. But other than that, I hope you like this video. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe.